I'm very pleased to have Brianna here. I hope you can still see. You can turn your chairs around. Dr. Brianna Stubbs is part of a company called HVMN, which is also known as Human. And after she has a PhD in metabolic physiology at the University of Oxford. That's why she has that smart voice. We always think people are so much smarter when we have an accent with it. She's actually conducted a number of animal and human studies relating to exogenous ketones, which she'll tell you about shortly. Her other famed, unbelievable thing that she's done is she's won the gold medal twice in rowing. Is that correct?
That's right.
For Britain. So give her a little hand of applause. She's the whole package. She's an athlete, she's brilliant, and she's attractive. I mean, you know, we all wish that we have children like this and marry them, and I have already, which has been great. Roger, Layla's here somewhere in the audience. Layla, would you wave and let your mother-in-law embarrass you for 2 seconds? Where is she? There she is. So they've been married almost a year now, and she's from Cartagena, Colombia, and I can't tell you how wonderful she is. So maybe you all introduce yourselves to her later today. In your bag is a wonderful book by Lisa Feldman Barrett. It's called The Secret Life of the Brain, and she's a professor from Northwest University at Harvard. So later on, I want you to read the book. It's a little thick from the standpoint that, it may keep you up at night, it may put you to sleep, depending on what your understanding of complex biology is. But it's actually quite an amazing theory that she's come up with. And we're going to just kind of riff here for a second, nothing too formal about the book, since it's a gift from the Diversity Council at Morgan Stanley that I'm on. And the whole idea is to talk about where do emotions come from. And in the book, she talks about this universal experience of the brain, understanding emotions, and their consequences. So it's kind of interesting when you think about women, they're always called the more emotional animal. Well, maybe that has something more to do with our intelligence and our ability to be closer to intuition would be my argument. But really the book sort of debunks a lot of what we think about and studied the pattern of people's facial movements. And there's all this science now about facial recognition, and they're using it with spyware and all this stuff. And this book basically debunks that whole theory, which was fascinating. And the question is, is the brain's understanding of emotions, is it hardwired? What do you think about that?
So I think what Lisa explores in the book is that she went out looking for a fingerprint of emotions in the brain, and she was convinced she was going to find it. And she describes running experiment after experiment after experiment and not being able to recapitulate what she was expecting, consistent patterns associated to different emotions in the brain. And as a PhD student trying to repeat your results and just doing experiments again and again and again and not getting the results that you're being expected to get by your supervisor, I can kind of only imagine the frustration that she must have felt. But I think actually the answer that she got was actually the right answer, and that's what she's gone on to explore throughout the rest of her career, that actually emotions are not consistent necessarily within people over their lifetime, and certainly not between people of different cultures. So I think the answer to the question is that there isn't necessarily a universal fingerprint for each emotion that we can read in the brain or necessarily in the face as well.
So I think we talked a little bit about the images they use. You'll notice it when you do read the book about basically there's 5 emotions: fear, disgust, happiness, sadness, and surprise. And one of the questions is, how does your face, do the features that you're making are they actually controlled by your face? Are they controlled by your culture? Are they controlled by your mind? Is it your mind that's doing the interpretation? How do you figure this out?
Well, I think in that particular experiment, they had a series of actors pose these very specific emotions that were meant to be very, very easily recognizable to all people. And actually they found that giving them again to different cultures, that people could not recognize these emotions and were not able to put 2 and 2 together, the emotion and the face. So I think, there's definitely a disconnect there.
And when we look at, people, you meet somebody and within 30 seconds you have an opinion of them. So part of that would be that you have to stop and realize that it's you subjugating them or that experience. It's not them giving you information. It's your own biology that's helping to come up with that snapshot of what you think that person is or who they are. And so to step back and realize that actually it's prejudgment or bias on your own part, not the other person's, which is really interesting. How do people experience emotions biologically? Does fear have an intrinsic meaning?
So, I mean, evolutionarily, fear would have played a huge part in how we managed to survive escaping the mountain lion out on the plains. Well, actually, the mountain lion in the mountain, that's a sort of silly example there. But basically, fear had a purpose. It was to keep us alive. And so the emotion that we experience and that we would describe to another human being is the emergent perception of us seeing the stimulus that's triggering fear. Perhaps then we experience our hair standing on end, we experience our heart racing, we get that rush in our stomachs. And all of these things are related to hormones and changing biological processes within the body, and our brain feels all of these things happening, and that's what we experience as fear. But it's a little different person to person what biological responses happen sometimes.
And do you think these emotions are hardwired, or are they cultural artifacts that we are assimilating?
I think, again, it would be slightly, I think the more subtle that the emotion is, the more cultural it is, especially if you look at, we were discussing before we got up here, how some cultures have no word for, say, depression. So maybe something like fear is pretty primal, and disgust maybe also pretty primal. You smell something awful and you kind of want to retch. But especially how we deal with other people, a lot of those behaviors are learned, and a lot of those are not hardwired and can be changed over time.
So it's interesting. I was thinking about, actually, after we were talking, here we've got, Google, Facebook, Microsoft building emotional detection systems. And if in fact what they're reading is biased from the people that have put the algorithms together, and they're going to use that information for purchasing power, for influencing decisions, how do we deal with the fact that everything we're doing is being recorded? And is it in fact accurate?
I think it's not going to be accurate for some cultures. I think when you even look at how primitive some voice recognition technology is, I don't know whether it's because I bought my phone here in America, but I still can't get Siri to do some of the things that I want her to do sometimes. Maybe it's the accent. But imagine like Scottish or Irish people, they have even more problems. If that's where we're at with voice recognition, emotional recognition, I think we're a really long way away from being able to read that with any accuracy, especially giving it power to then make decisions. I think there needs to be a lot more research done, a lot more data collected in a lot more diverse populations before we'll be anywhere near giving that decision-making power.
And then you wonder how it's passed on, because there are certain, cultural bias again, and then we have the genetic testing that's happening, and you think, oh, wow, my family comes from XYZ, and, they all think potty humor is hysterical, whatever. Talking about the Jewish humor over there, which my husband thinks is disgusting. But, having these, cultural things are kind of interesting. Or even when, how is it passed on? And then, when you walk into a store and you smell cookies, and what does that do biologically to you?
Well, that, again, it comes back to the stimulus is this fantastic baking smell, and the first thing you do, or I do anyway, is I'm kind of looking for where it is, and then your brain gets more information. I'm outside the cookie section, outside a bakery, and then you can also assimilate, when was the last time I ate? You're not doing any of this consciously, it's all just happening in a split second. When was the last time I ate? Am I full? Am I hungry? If I just had a big breakfast, then I'm less likely to feel that kind of desperate need to go and stuff my face with all of the cookies that are being piped out through the door. But so I think that's pretty hardwired, but it varies, again, person to person, context to context. And I think hunger is something that probably more people experience in a common way.
So that later in the book, it leads exactly to what you're talking about. Is if you stop and realize that emotions that seem to happen to you are actually made by you. then maybe you won't be overreacting to certain kinds of emotions. And if you stop and think about, are we really at the mercy of our emotions? We aren't. And you know, like you get coming up before an audience, you know, some people have crippling anxiety, and what causes that? It's a biological reaction, a fear reaction, you know, sweat, anxiety, heart starts to beat faster, and then if you take a breath, we're going to do a lot of breathing today, it does slow down your responses, and it leaves you with a better sense of control of environment. And you know, that really begs the question, if you take more control of your life, does that mean you have more responsibility? And who is responsible for behaving badly? Is it you, or is it the car, you know, that's honking at you, and how you react to that car that drives up the anger coefficient? So this is, I think, in some ways, it's really breakthrough research, because it does always come back to, you know, are we the only ones that can change our behavior? And I think the answer is yes. So if we become calmer in our own self and we understand what causes the overreactions, you know, if it's biological, is it hunger, is it whatever? You were talking about not getting enough sleep. What are some of the other things that would, you know?
Tiredness, hunger. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to your environment. So yes, we are responsible for how we interact, how we respond to our environment, but we can help ourselves make better decisions by being thoughtful about the environment we put ourselves in. So at the end of the day, I know that ultimately I'm responsible for what time I get into bed and go to sleep, and if I don't do that early enough, then that's going to affect how I feel the next day. And I know that, you know, if I go and walk past, if I commute past the bakery, I'm going to get hungry and crave sweet treats, as whereas if I change my route or just sort of power on straight past that, kind of, you know, making it easier for yourself to make the right decision. You can not only control your reactions, but you can control your environment as well. So it's just a case of being thoughtful and realizing that you do have that power.
So just to sum up this, and then I'm going to have Dr. Stubbs take over from here. Emotions are built. They are not built in. So when you take a deep breath, you can embrace the emotions, and then you can actually be not only more flexible, but you can be more potent in controlling your own life.
Good morning. I hope you all enjoyed your breakfast. I hope the caffeine is just about kicking in. Everyone's feeling alert and ready for a day of sharing. And I'm really, really privileged to be here with you guys this morning. I'm just going to share a little bit about my own personal experiences, my research, and some little tiny tidbits that I think will be helpful for you guys as we think about how we can affect our environment, how we can quantify ourselves, and how we can take control of different things in order to help us live better, live longer, be healthier, and really just kind of through the lens of optimizing our own performance. As Theo said as she introduced me, I had a bit of a unique perspective because for 4 years I was combining a full-time PhD with being a full-time athlete. I remember when I sat down and I was trying to make this decision whether I would take on the PhD. It was all kind of happening at the same time. I'd been invited to join the British senior rowing team, and at that point it was their training program was 3 sessions a day, 6 days a week. I didn't really have that much of an idea about what my PhD would entail, but I kind of imagined that a PhD from Oxford would probably be pretty hard work. So I sort of sat down and I was like, well, you know, there's 24 hours in the day, like training only takes like 5, and then I'll just get home and go to the lab and it'll all fit in somehow. And I remember I kind of got 6 months in or so, and I was exhausted. I had all sorts of like hormonal problems because I was dieting to compete in the lightweight class. I was stressed, and basically my performance in both areas was very, very sub what it needed to be. And so to go from that place very early on in my journey, where I was, you know, it was a long way out from the Olympics and the World Championships, and I still had several years of my PhD still to go from that low point where I thought that I wouldn't be able to carry on both to winning the World Championships twice and finishing my PhD, and now moving out here to be part of the team commercializing what I worked on for my PhD. I think I managed that through being thoughtful, looking at my body as a system. Not, I think we all think that with the power of the mind we can push through and do anything, and that is true to an extent, but you have to listen to your body as well. So I think what we're going to talk about today, it'll hopefully give you a bit of a new lens to think about how you can optimize your own performance by being mindful of your body. I'm going to talk a little bit first about the term biohacking. The first time I heard the term biohacking was when the two CEOs, in fact the CEO and co-founders of my company visited Oxford, and they were in this big book-panelled room, and the term biohacking I doubt had ever been uttered in this hallowed hall of learning. And I was like, what is this? It sounds so Silicon Valley, so nerdy, I can't identify with this at all. And actually, when I started to learn more about it, I realized that actually biohacking is a term that we can all identify with. Really, to me, it's being very, very mindful about the inputs that you put into your body, trying to understand how those inputs interact with your body, and then taking a systematic approach to looking at how your body performs, the outputs of your body, and then sort of playing with all of those in order to optimize outcomes that you're interested in. So some of us, as an athlete, I was interested in my physical performance, and as a PhD student, I was interested in my cognitive performance, and as a community of women, we're interested in how we can be better mothers, daughters, sisters, how we can perform better at work and live longer, healthier lives. So really, biohacking is just treating our body a little bit like we would treat a computer system. And actually, it's kind of apt using that term here in Silicon Valley, but it's the birthplace of computer hacking. Back 20, 30 years ago, you needed to be in a special place and have special skills in order to hack into the mainframe and use computing power. But now we all have supercomputers in our pockets, and biohacking is really the same. We all now have access to very, very powerful tools that we can use to not only quantify our biology, as Theo was mentioning in the introduction, but also to shift our biology as well. I think the first generation of biohacking technology is all stuff that we're kind of familiar with. In terms of inputs, caffeine, that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. It's something that we put into our systems, and it has a measurable and tangible effect on us. I'm trying to think of the other examples that I had on my picture slides. Meditation and mindfulness. That's something that's definitely kind of more on the up now, but again, it's been around for thousands and thousands of years. You can sit and modify your environment, modify your breathing, modify the inputs into your system, and that has tangible and important effects on how you then, your biology is responding and how you interact with the world around you. In terms of measuring outputs, we all get on a set of scales, maybe once every now and again, depending on what you're optimizing for. That we all have in our iPhones the health app tracking our steps. People wear Fitbits, Whoops, that kind of thing. These are all first generation monitors of our human biological computer system, as it were. But really that technology is expanding exponentially. I couldn't even begin to tell you where it will be in 10 years' time, but in terms of inputs, we are seeing the birth of neurostimulation coming into the public sphere. There's a company called Halo Neuroscience. They're marketing mainly to athletes at the moment, but it looks like a super funky set of headphones, and it has a little electrodes on it that stimulate your motor cortex, and they say that if you wear this before a workout, it'll help your body to learn the motor patterns of the workout. So it's being used by weightlifters and sort of skill-based sports, but actually also being used by people who want to do things like learn how to play the piano. Another type of neurostimulation I came across recently is a headset that has a little electrode that stimulates your vestibular nerve, and your vestibular nerve is involved in balance. And they say that by stimulating this nerve, they can convince your brain that it's moving, and this alters your weight set point. Now, I have no idea whether or not this works, but I think it's a kind of a sign that in this space, we're kind of getting super advanced in the way that we can manipulate our bodies, and that's only going to carry on getting more and more sophisticated. Another place that technology is growing fast is in what we consume. And so we'll talk a little bit more about my own research, but I've been working on next generation nutrition, an input that is going to really powerfully shift our metabolism and alter our biology and alter our performance. And then again, output tracking also getting much more sensitive. I don't know whether anyone's ever seen the Oura Ring, but it's it looks like a big black signet ring. You wear it, and it constantly tracks your heart rate, tracks your sleep, tracks the variability in time between each heartbeat, and that can tell you how stressed you are and how your body is responding to the environment. There was another. In our company, we often wear continuous glucose monitors. So it has a little needle that goes just in your skin. And every 5 minutes, it reads your blood glucose. So you can really see how what you're putting in your mouth is affecting your own blood biochemistry minute by minute. At the moment, this is a technology that's kind of mainly being used in the disease setting in diabetes, but it's becoming more and more common for people who are just health conscious to be interested in tracking their biomarkers constantly like this. So yeah, as I said earlier, I really don't know where we're going to be in 10 years' time. Another kind of interesting thought is that up until now, we've kind of always considered healthcare and self-optimization to be two separate things, but actually human performance, it's not a straight bifurcation like that. Human performance is a spectrum. You want to take yourself from sick to healthy, yes, but also you want to take yourself from healthy to optimal. And so the line between what is healthcare and what is self-optimization and biohacking and you know, maybe might have been considered fringe up until now is blurring. And there are things that may have been useful in healthcare that people can use up in the self-optimization realm, perhaps. So I think it's an interesting lens to start to put on how we appraise the technologies and advances as they happen. So I mean, yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about my rowing, but I feel like I kind of did that. Yeah, it basically. I was measuring, every morning I'd get up, I'd weigh myself because I was competing in weight category sport. I had to be 125 pounds. And so to do that, I was under 10% body fat. So I was always counting all of my calories, using diet tracking apps. We would use very advanced whole body scanning to look at body composition. I was having regular blood tests and getting topped up with vitamin D and iron as I was deficient. You know, it's just everything. I did, in retrospect, I was very much kind of like a piece of machinery in this kind of system. And then we had sort of cognitive and mental coaching as well. Everything was designed in order to get you to the peak of physical performance in order to compete on the world stage. So I think, to sum up, really, the first part of this talk anyway, that biohacking, whilst the term might kind of draw kind of a wry smile to start with, actually it's something that we are all familiar with, even though really the term itself is kind of new. The idea has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's actually something that is really relevant to all of us. I think that everyone here, in much the same way that now everyone's proud to call themselves a feminist, I think in the future the term biohacker will be something that we all can identify with a little more strongly and feel proud of taking ownership of our own biology. So we'll kind of move on to talking about my specific area of research, which is the field of ketosis and how that is a really powerful biohack for metabolism and how that can affect performance, health, and longevity. So hands up here, anyone who's heard of the ketogenic diet before or ketosis? That's pretty impressive. A lot of people, maybe 5 years ago or so, most people wouldn't have heard of it. It's the ketogenic diet and the idea of a ketogenic state is becoming more and more popular over the last few years or so. We're going to rewind and discuss what it is and why we have it. So our brains are probably the most important organ in our bodies, aside from, I mean, heart obviously also essential, but the brain, it's only 2% of our body mass, and it takes up 20% of the energy that our body uses every day. Now, back when we were kind of hunter-gatherers and our brains were growing in size, this was a challenge that we had to meet in terms of evolutionary biology, because the brain is so energy hungry and the brain needs sugar to keep it going. Fat, even though we have an awful lot of it, we have over 100,000 calories stored as fat. Even a super lean person has plenty of energy stored as fat, but none of that energy can cross from our blood into the brain. So the brain can't make use of this big energy pool. By comparison, glucose is the brain's main energy source, but we only have about 2,000 calories of glucose stored. That's stored in our liver and in our muscles as well. But that runs out pretty quickly. Within 24 to 48 hours of not eating anything, your body starts running out of glucose, and that means trouble for the brain, because if that blood glucose falls, then you're going to become unconscious and ultimately die. I mean, we all have experienced the feeling of like dropping blood sugar. I mean, we're not there yet in the day, but maybe about 4 p.m., 3 p.m., a little time after lunch, a little way before dinner, everything starts dropping, you feel a little sleepy, you need maybe like a tea with the sugar in it or something to pick you up. And so really, I think that really highlights how important it is to kind of maintain that steady level of blood glucose in order to perform at your best cognitively. Now, as I said, small stores of glucose in the body, large stores of fat, this seems like an evolutionary kind of fail here. How can we make the fat accessible for the brain? Now, the answer to that is ketone metabolism. So what happens when carbohydrate is restricted, whether that's through fasting or through changes in your diet, the body can turn fat into small molecules that are called ketones. And these small molecules that are derived from fat are able to cross into the brain and act as a fuel. So this means that we go from only being able to survive 24 to 48 hours before our glucose runs out to being able to survive days and days on end. In fact, there are documented cases of people doing 360, almost 1 year long fasts with just water and minerals, because if they're obese enough to start with, the body can just convert fat into these molecules called ketones, and the ketones can keep the brain going and protect the breakdown of protein and helpful things that would otherwise cause death. So, I mean, the two ketone bodies that we typically talk about in human physiology are called beta-hydroxybutyrate. May have heard of that one being measured with little blood finger pricks. Acetoacetate, people can test for that using a urine dipstick, and acetone, and so that's one that appears in the breath. So sometimes people have a breath meter and they can use that to tell whether their body is producing ketones using that. So we've got beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone. These are three ketone bodies that all of us have the ability to produce and then also burn as energy. When in periods of starvation, the brain flips from its usual fuel consumption, which is 100% glucose, to up to 60 to 80% of the brain's energy coming from ketones. So it's a very, very important fuel for the brain, and that we can all start to tap into to actually improve how our brains function. So thinking about biohacking, this would have been better illustrated by a graph, but I kind of like to think that if we have time along the bottom axes, lifespan, let's call it, and capacity, which is a kind of a combination of physical and cognitive performance on the, x-axis is lifestyle, y-axis is capacity. We reach our peak capacity somewhere in the middle of our lives, and then when we're babies and infants, we have a lot of lifespan still to come, but kind of low capacity. And then as we get older, you start to your capacity starts to tail off. And then the end, you'll die. But what we're interested in is maximizing the area underneath that curve. So can we extend our lifespan and increase the area under that curve? Can we push up our performance, increase the area under that curve? Or can we possibly decrease the tail off into morbidity, and that would also increase the area under the curve, and objectively we are improving our overall capabilities as a human. So in my mind, and the research that is emerging seems to suggest that ketones can do all of those things. So firstly, if we think about lifespan, there's increasing evidence now that caloric restriction, so people, especially in people that do extended religious fasting, caloric restriction is linked to increased lifespan. And it's becoming understood that the presence of ketones in the blood is a key mediator of that. Actually, a ton of the research has been done locally in UCSF and also UC Davis as well. And they've been putting animals on a ketogenic diet, or even a cyclical ketogenic diet, which means 1 week on a ketogenic diet, 1 week off. And they've seen that doing this can extend lifespan up to 13%, which is pretty significant. I'm not sure that we'd get such a huge increase in humans, and it's very, very difficult to think about doing a lifespan study in humans, but I think we're starting to understand the biology and starting to gather evidence in humans that suggests that the similar effects could be seen with humans, either periodically achieving ketosis through caloric restriction or by diet. Now moving on to think about morbidity. Now, part of the reason that we start to lose capacity as we age is linked to damage inside our cells, oxidative stress, and also activation of inflammatory processes throughout our bodies. Now, a lot of the early work showing that ketones themselves are powerful antioxidants, and they're also acting in a very strong anti-inflammatory way as well. So if we look at some specific disease examples, which one was I going to use here? Gout. It's it's linked to this process called the NLRP3 inflammasome. So they've used a mouse model looking at this very specific inflammatory pathway and treated the mice by giving them extra ketones and seen massive reductions in inflammation and improved clinical symptoms as well. So I think using this metabolic state potentially very powerful to slow down the decline related to age. Another big and interesting age-related condition is Alzheimer's disease. That has got not only an inflammatory component, but one thing that we've seen in the brains of people, even before they start to develop symptoms, is that the brain gets less good at using glucose. So it's very much like the brain is going into a starvation state. Up to 5 to 10 years before any symptoms appear, if you put someone in a brain imaging scanner and look at their glucose metabolism, it's downregulated. Now, in terms of science, we still don't know whether this is the chicken or the egg, whether you get your protein changes, your plaques and taus, that affects glucose metabolism, and that's why we're seeing that, or whether glucose metabolism is downregulated first and then that triggers the plaques and taus. This is showing a potential decrease in morbidity with ketosis. So yeah, very interested to understand how being in the metabolic state of ketosis could affect how we age as well. And then finally, performance. This is actually how I came into the field. We were recruiting for participants who were elite athletes to look at the effects of taking ketone-containing drinks on performance. And I saw the ad and signed up at the time I was rowing for Oxford. And the results of that study were that if you give the body ketones and then exercise, you perform 2 to 3% better because you've got this extra super efficient fuel source that your body can use that enhances endurance. So not only has this been seen in people, it was seen, if it seems funny actually to go from talking to the human results back to animal results, but we also did a set of animal experiments where we fed ketone diet, a standard Western diet, which is high in fat and carbohydrates, and then also a high fat diet. And we looked at treadmill running performance over a whole week where these animals were run until they were exhausted. And we saw that with the ketone, animals each day were running 33% further when their diet was supplemented with ketones. So it was pretty dramatic. And actually it was my one of my thesis examiners who ran this experiment, and he told me how they were in the lab until like midnight and they had to get up at 6 a.m. the next day because these animals were just running for so much longer than they expected. So the fuel that you put into your body has a massive impact on performance. The other thing that was going on during this particular animal experiment was they were also solving a maze. It's called a radial maze, so it's a little like a clock face. You drop the animal in the middle softly, and then you let them find the... I realized that drop was maybe a bad word, but then they have to find their way out. And we were seeing a 38% improvement in the time taken to solve that maze. So I think it's still up for discussion whether we'd see such a big improvement in humans, but given that ketones can be used as a fuel throughout the body, in the muscles and in the brain, I'm pretty excited by the implications of being able to tap into this for us all to enhance our performance. I want to talk a little bit now about how we can get into ketosis. So I've told you quite a lot now about the benefits. Hopefully you're interested, excited to find out about how we can all implement this in our lifestyle. Don't worry if you can't read that. I was kind of hoping that the slides might be bigger, but I can talk you through this. So the most primal way that we can all trigger ketosis, all of us can tap into this, is through a process called intermittent fasting. Sounds kind of big and scary, sounds maybe like something you wouldn't want to be doing, but actually it's very, very easy, and I'd argue it's something that everyone here could build into their lives tomorrow and start seeing benefits. Intermittent fasting really just means increasing time between meals. So a standard intermittent fasting protocol is called 16-8. So there's 16 hours where you don't eat and you eat in an 8-hour window. So just to kind of like put clock times on that, you would get up and not eat breakfast and you eat your meals between 12 noon and 8 p.m. And you could just do that every day. The interesting thing about fasting is it can be flexible. You don't have to stick to that 12 noon to 8. You could shift it to 1, 9. But it's just really about maintaining that kind of eating window so that you have 16 hours where you're depleting your body's carbohydrate reserves, letting your body just reset. Not having a bit of time where you don't take in calories means that you're not having an insulin spike, you're not triggering digestion. You're giving your body a little bit of time to do this process called autophagy, which is cell spring cleaning. It basically means that the cells have time to clear up anything that's building up inside. But in order to do that, you just have to give it time. And even, a snack at 10 p.m., that's going to kind of derail that process. So in order to achieve these kind of biological outcomes, you do need to be strict and disciplined and mindful about making that time. I mean, I think what I was trying to illustrate with this slide is intermittent fasting not only benefiting you by triggering ketone production, but it's been linked to enhanced brain health, improved metabolic health, especially now where a lot of us are at risk of prediabetes. It's very, very beneficial. Promoting weight loss, boosting our immune system as well. It's unclear at this stage how many of these benefits are linked to actually restricting calories or how many of them are due to the presence of ketones. That work is still kind of ongoing. And I suppose I should also tie up by saying, 16-8 is a pretty common fast, but people, personally, I do a 24-hour fast once a week. So I go from dinner one day to dinner the next day. And I find that very manageable. And I also find that it helps me be more mindful of my food. We're kind of surrounded we're in an environment where it's very easy to snack all of the time. And I think it just taking control over your eating, it kind of resets me a little bit. And obviously on the more end of the extreme end of the intermittent fasting spectrum, there are people who do 36-hour fasts or even 3 to 4 to 5 day fasts. Some of these have very interesting uses in terms of therapeutics. Nowadays, there's a growing interest in using fasting alongside chemotherapy. So if you lower the glucose concentrations in the blood and in the body, that is thought to be a more toxic for cancer cells environment. So it's meant to potentiate the effects of chemotherapy. So a lot of interest in using fasting therapeutically. Intermittent fasting or just straight up fasting is the way that the reason that we evolved ketosis to deal with periods of no calories whatsoever. But there are actually, this is interesting. This is blood ketone levels over a long fast. I'm sure none of you at the back are going to be able to see the numbers here. Again, I was hoping this would be bigger. But this is data taken from someone who fasted for 40 days straight, back when you could get ethical approval to do that to people. You can't nowadays. You can see that actually ketone levels reach a plateau. So after this fast lasted 40 days, as I said, blood ketone levels reaching kind of 6 millimolar. So I know in America you don't measure glucose in millimoles, so it's not really very easy to compare. But just as a benchmark, after 40 days of eating nothing, you get to 6. Personally, after 1 day of eating nothing, I might be between 0.5 to 1. So it takes a really, really long time for the body to get properly going and really boosting and upregulating ketone production. It's a slow process. It doesn't happen overnight. If you don't want to try fasting, and that sounds a little extreme, people here, a lot of you heard of the ketogenic diet. So this is an alternative that you can use to increase ketone production and ketone levels inside the blood. Although again, it's not necessarily super easy. A ketogenic diet is very, very high in fat, about 80% of the energy coming from fat. So most of this, and you have to be very careful about your protein intake as well. And carbohydrates are kind of pretty much out of the question. Just to give you perspective, there's about 25 grams of carbohydrate in an apple. And when you start the ketogenic diet, people recommend you trying to hit about 50 grams of carbohydrate. So 2 apples worth of carbohydrates in a day, and that's it. There's carbohydrates in pretty much all vegetables, so you have to really watch what you're doing there. It takes a lot of thought to follow the ketogenic diet properly. But it has seen a very big uptick in popularity right now for weight loss and helping people control diabetes. There was recently a trial run here in San Francisco by a company called Virta Health, and this is blood ketone levels from that trial. So people followed a ketogenic diet for a whole year. And you can actually see the blood ketone levels were much, much lower than we just described in fasting. So for those of you at the back, the peak, which is happening around about 50 days, is only 0.6 to 0.8. So generally speaking, trying to get into ketosis through diet, it's more difficult to do just because you have to be so careful. And I think that a telling thing here is actually the levels are declining over time. So I think people's adherence to the program was getting less good the longer that they were on it. People were getting less disciplined, less strict. Fat-based ketone supplements, in the middle there's a picture of a ketone supplement that is in a salt form. So you have the ketone beta-hydroxybutyrate, which we've been discussing a little bit, given alongside a salt. That has limitations in terms of gut tolerability and also in terms of the implications of the salt for your health if you were using it long term. And then on the right, there's a picture of the product I've been working on here with human, which is called a ketone ester, which doesn't contain fat and it doesn't contain salt. It's just ketone bound to ketone by what's called an ester bond, and we eat esters all of the time. They're what gives our food flavor. So it's very, very readily, rapidly digestible, and it can achieve levels of ketones very, very similar to fasting, like 5 to 6 millimolar in half an hour, which neither of these other two supplements can do. So I think the tools that we've kind of discussed today, fasting, ketogenic diet, and now ketone supplements, are ways that we can feed our bodies with ketones, provide ketones to our brains, provide ketones to our muscles, and potentially achieve some of these interesting longevity, morbidity, and performance effects without necessarily having to play with diet and fasting in quite the same way. So to wrap up, it's a very, very exciting field. Lots and lots of research being done on the effects of fasting, ketogenic diet, and also exogenous ketones. And really what we feel like we've done at Human with ketone drinks is created a whole fourth food group. On our label, there's 120 calories, but no carbs, no fat, no protein. All of the energy is coming from ketones. So in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe we're going to be redefining what we think of as food. Maybe now we have this whole separate metabolic state that we can tap into and that everyone can tap into that may well have very big implications for longevity and performance as well. So happy to take questions now or in the coffee break. I think we're tight for time now, but I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks very much for having me.
Thanks, you guys.